Today is Pi Day, the holiday when nerds with no social life, like me, get excited that today's date looks like the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter. There are two main ways we celebrate the day. By baking pastries that reference the extremely funny joke that Pi and PIE sound the same because the E is silent. Or by memorizing as many digits as possible of a very specific string of random numbers.
1.77245.
I don't want to know what the square root of pi is.
You knew that?
Now, while I do love to bake, I'm on a special diet.
I'm on a special diet.
So I chose to go with the latter. I memorized 150 digits, which I thought would be enough to be mildly impressive, but not so many that I would have to take a hard look in the mirror and ask myself what I'm doing with my life. I already knew 50, and I memorized another 100 in 2 days. And after I proved that I actually learned it, I'm going to show you how you can hack your brain to memorize anything. Easier, faster, and for longer. Even something as senselessly random as pi. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. 3.141592638846293793782048279399374941469342 117067 9821 4808 651 328230 66 470 9 38 44 6095505 8 2231 7 2 5 3 5 9 4 0 8 1 2 8. That's 150. I hope that was mildly impressive. So, how did I memorize 100 random numbers in 2 days? And no, didn't take me all day to do it. Just like a couple hours. And how can you learn to memorize anything easier, faster, and for longer? To answer that, we're gonna dive into some neuroscience, and maybe even some neuropseudoscience, including my own explanations and hypotheses. Because, like I explained in my last video, placebo programming, neurohacking isn't just about what's true. It's also about what works. So if I got a fact wrong, feel free to leave an angry comment about it. Or, maybe, try it out and see if it works for you anyways. If you don't know me, greetings! I'm Mayhem, musician, philosopher, cult leader, human. You're watching my series Neurohacking. Tutorials on how to master your mind, made by a girl voted most likely to teach the teacher. I used to be blonde. It was a thing. This is my first one on the topic of memory. There'll be many more to help you become a memory black belt. But since it's a nerd holiday, let's just focus on the 10 techniques I actually used to memorize pi as easy as pie. Get it? That was a joke. Because the E is silent. 1. Long-term melodies. I memorized the first 50 digits of pi back in high school, back before I even won the prestigious award of being the nerdiest girl in school. In fact, now that I think about it, I'm pretty sure that might have even contributed to my victory. But to be honest, it wasn't much of a competition. But that was many years ago. How can I still remember them so clearly and say them so fast? Well, when we think of memorization, we usually think of things that take a lot of effort to memorize, like a list of dates for your history class about the revolution in the Republic of Congo, I'm not sure if the Republic of Congo even had a revolution or if it's even a real place, but it really sounds like something my history teachers would make me study. So, being the type of person that I am, I looked it up and discovered that it was real and was actually called the Congo Crisis, which sounds more like the sense of existential dread you feel on the dance floor of your cousin's wedding after 3.5 margaritas because you're always the bridesmaid, never the bride. But I digress. As that train of thought detour illustrates, if you asked me to tell you just one fact I learned in middle school history class, I'd have to start making stuff up. But if you asked me if I could recite all the lyrics to Tick Tock by Kesha, I would tell you that I wake up in the morning feeling like P. Diddy. Grab my glasses, I'm out the door, I'm gonna hit this city. Before I leave, brush my teeth, then I brush them some more. I brush my teeth 3 times before I leave that door. So why is one memory so clear while the other is in the recycle bin? Melody. When a melody is catchy, it gives our brain a pattern to latch onto. And when it does, whatever information is associated with that melody gets encoded with it. Even if the melody is very subtle, adding one to what you're trying to memorize gives your echoic memory, your memory of sounds, something to do, which can act like a cue card for whatever you attach to it. Because 3.141592653589793238462 is a lot harder to remember than 3.141592653589793238462. Fun fact, this is also how I memorized the quadratic formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the quantity b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. I'm really not beating the nerd allegations, am I? 2. Seeing order in chaos. So that's how I remembered 50 digits of pi for several years. But how did I memorize twice as many in 2 days? This challenge was all about finding patterns, which are frameworks of meaning to interpret and understand the things we see. Objectively speaking, there are no patterns in pi. It's completely random. But human brains, some more than others, are wired to search for patterns everywhere. Your brain takes in a bajillion bits of information every day, and it has to discard most of it. So it has a system for determining what is important and what is junk. It keeps things that it thinks are meaningful and things that it thinks will happen again, which we collectively refer to as patterns. By creating a framework for what type of patterns I'm searching for and breaking them into small groups, it made random numbers feel not random at all. 3. The rotary phone. You may have noticed me making motions with my hands while I was recalling the digits I memorized, almost like how you dial a number on a rotary telephone. This hack is all about using spatial memory to enhance your memorization. See, memories are really just encoded snapshots of things we capture with our 5 senses. Things we can hear, see, smell, taste, and touch.
I'm kind of psychic. I have a fifth sense.
So if you want to remember data, you need to convert it into something your senses experience. This is why it can be easier to remember movies than books, and why you remember a book much better if you turn it into a movie in your imagination. Data is instructions that you can turn into a type of sensation, but our brains aren't any good at remembering pure data. So when I was playing the Pi quiz on piday.org to learn this, I watched the number keyboard on my laptop as I was typing it in. So visual patterns like a sequence of numbers being close together and then moving to the opposite side of the keyboard help create patterns for groups like 2, 3, 0, 7, 8, 1. 4. Evening out the odds. Another framework I used to help create memorable patterns was something called grouping, taking a large set of data and separating it into smaller categories. For this challenge, I separated the numbers 0 through 9 into evens and odds. This meant I only had to remember which category the next number was in, and once I recalled that, it was twice as easy to remember which number it was. And because our brains don't work like computers, we have more accurate memory if we encode things in steps like this. I often use a 2-step retrieval process to memorize names, such as associating the name with an image that reminds me of it. When I'm trying to remember, I remember the image before the name, which helps me remember the name. If you're like me, you might have a little bit of synesthesia, where you associate numbers or words with other sensations like colors or feelings. For me, evens and odds feel very different from each other. Evens feel rounded, stable, and grounded, while odds feel sharp, pointed, and edgy. So separating them in this way also helps tie in sensory memory, giving the data more hooks for your mind to latch onto, like Velcro. Fun fact, did you know that Velcro was invented by someone who noticed how well burrs stuck to his dog's fur on walks? So he studied them under a microscope and copied the technique they'd evolved to use to create the fastener we use today. So Velcro is basically just synthetic burrs and synthetic dog fur. 5. You can't sit with us. Because pi is so random, patterns can fade as quickly as they seem to emerge. So it's necessary to separate the patterns into small groups, or cliques, that each have their own rules. Memorizing works better in blocks for the same reason it's easier to remember 2 groups of 5 than 1 group of 10. Because you're breaking the sequence down into simpler parts, which are easier to memorize. Think of it like picking up a 10-pound weight 10 times instead of a 100-pound weight just once. It's considerably easier because the threshold of effort has been lowered. This rule is also the same reason that, at least in the United States, telephone numbers are separated into 3 sections. A 3-digit area code, in parentheses, then a 7-digit phone number split into 3 digits, a dash, and then 4 digits, which is much easier to read and remember than 10 digits clumped together. I applied this law by making chunks of numbers, around 6 each, that followed a certain rule, like being all even numbers, having a repeating digit, being in ascending or descending order, or having some cultural association. In short, each clique had its own code, its own rules, like
On Wednesdays, we wear pink.
6. Doublespeak. Memorizing a pair of numbers is easier than memorizing 2 different numbers for a couple reasons. 1, there's only 1 digit to memorize, and 2, our brains already start detecting patterns once something happens twice in a row. And if it only happens twice, our brains just end up thinking,
Wow! If I had a nickel for every time I was doomed by a puppet, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right?
So use this hack to your advantage. If you're trying to remember something random, find another example of it happening somewhere else. Your brain will start to see it as an emergent pattern rather than a one-off fluke, and will treat it like more important information. 7. Another pattern I looked for was whenever a sequence of numbers had numbers in ascending or descending counting order.
Ah, yes. Oh, greetings. Ah, that's 1. 1 bat. 2 bats. 3 fabulous flyers.
This works because the order that numbers are in is something so ingrained in our memories, we forgot it was something we ever even had to memorize. The same is true of the alphabet, although numbers have an actual good reason for being in numerical order, whereas the alphabet could theoretically be in any other random order without changing too many things in the timeline of our reality. I think. Who knows what it would be like? BYGZMKOFCPDWHQ. The way to use this hack is to associate something you're working on memorizing with something relevant that you've memorized so well it's second nature to you. Why make up a new mnemonic you have to learn when you could use one you already know? 8. Synaptic bond. James synaptic bond. The next hack I used was to memorize by associations. Some sequences reminded me of numbers with an established cultural cachet, like 117067 reminded me of the famous 007. The simple way to apply this to your work is to use lateral thinking to connect what you're studying to anything it reminds you of, even if it doesn't make any sense. For more on lateral thinking, check out my video, How to Think Like a Crab. 9. That's so fetch. I know everyone tells you not to have any distractions while you're studying, but I'm actually going to tell you the opposite. You might not have enough distractions. Let me explain. If you're studying for a test, you might think that reading the notes over and over is going to help you. But most of what you'll be practicing is the skill of reading what's on a page. When you're actually sitting in the exam room, you're going to need to use a very different skill: retrieval. When you read a flashcard and then try to hold it in your mind without losing focus on it, you're only retrieving the memory from your sensory memory, the clearest part of your memory, but also the one that lasts the shortest. To keep it for longer, you need to move it into your working memory, where you're using effort to recall what you've learned. And how do you do that? Distractions. Now, I'm not saying you should be scrolling on TikTok for an hour in the middle of studying, or at all, ever. Just focusing on a different thing you've learned for a minute can be enough to activate your working memory. It's like having a rest time between reps of push-ups, but instead of clearing away lactic acid from your muscles, you're clearing away your false confidence in your extreme short-term memory and training your brain to store it in your working memory. And just like with working out, you're trying to find a sweet spot of difficulty, the hardest you can challenge yourself while retaining good form. So it should take some effort to remember, but not so much that you have to look at your notes. Start with a small amount of new information to remember, and a short distraction between reading and reciting it. For me, 1 to 3 new digits was all I added each time. And reciting the previous 100 or so digits was enough of a distraction to engage my working memory. Start easy, and work your way up until you feel challenged, but don't have to check your notes to figure the answer out. If you're having trouble remembering, be patient with yourself. Don't peek until you've thought for a minute. One of the biggest mistakes you can make studying is by not making yourself struggle for the answer. When you believe you can just look up the answer anytime you like, you're training your brain that that information doesn't need to be memorized. Just like many people can't remember phone numbers anymore since their phones started automatically storing them for them. You want to train your brain to fetch information, but if you don't put it far enough out of reach that it has to go fetch, you're just doing this. Please throw? No take! Only throw! Of course, the amount of information you add and changing your focus mid-study session aren't the only things you need to take into account when finding your memorization sweet spot. There's also 10. Absence makes the mind grow fonder. This next neurohack is kind of an extension of the last one. It's something called spaced repetition, where you place an interval of time between each time you try to recall something you're learning. This is about spacing out your study sessions instead of trying to do it all at once, which starts to turn working memory into strong, long-term memory. Instead of studying for 1 hour straight, try studying for 10 hours every... Instead of studying for 1 hour straight, try studying for 10 minutes every 6 hours. Or, if you haven't procrastinated until the last minute, break it into several days. To use our next trick, 11. Bonus rounds! Overnight success. This neurohack will literally help you learn as you sleep. And all you have to do is sleep. Long-term memories are created while we sleep. So the better your sleep is, the more data you'll be able to upload to your mind's hard drive. For extra potency, study right before you sleep to lock in memory. If what you're studying is really boring, it might even help you fall asleep. Just be sure not to use screens with blue light before bed. Ideally, set your lights and screens to a dark setting, or turn them off completely once the sun sets. This biohacking trick helps you set a healthy circadian rhythm, where you can regenerate everything that's wrong with you overnight. But whatever you do, don't spend all night studying instead of sleeping, thinking that just because you're working harder, you're learning more. Believe it or not, your brain is actually working harder to memorize while you're sleeping than it is while you're studying. So embrace the Taoist principle of Wu Wei and let your brain do the heavy lifting for you. Now at this point you may be wondering, Mayhem, did you get a tattoo? Yes, a temporary one. And you can get one too. They're available on my merch store. I put the link in the description. They feature my logo, the Sigil of Mayhem, which I designed as a symbol to represent having the bravery to embrace chaos, so you can transform it into the new order of actualizing your highest potential and creating the best life you can dream of living. It's $6, which is even cheaper than a real tattoo. They're made in the USA, and every purchase is hand-packed by yours truly. If you love these videos, this is the best way to support the channel, so I can spend all day making videos to teach you stuff you'll actually use in a way that's not boring. And when you show all your friends your new tattoo, you can tell all your friends you're in a cult, which will totally give you extra cool factor. This statement has not been evaluated by the FDA and is not intended to prevent or cure any disease. But hey, it can't hurt to try. If you made it this far in the video, congratulations! Your attention span is better than 99% people these days. I hope you learned something from this that will help you learn everything else a little bit easier. Stay tuned for more tutorials on how to think more effectively. Check out my other videos in my neurohacking series, and let me know in the comments if you have any questions or if there are any thinky problems you have that you want to neurohack. Think of this channel like GitHub, but instead of coding your computer, we're coding our minds. Because even if you're only human, just like I am, clearly, we can all get a little closer to being superhuman. Farewell for now, and happy Pi Day. Love, Mayhem.